This week, the House passed a bill that would seek to ban non-U.S. citizens from voting in D.C.'s elections. Now, this marks another attempt by lawmakers in Congress taking aim at the district. The bill would forbid any non-citizens from voting in elections for municipal officers or on the ballot initiatives and referendums. In 2022, D.C. Council passed a bill that would allow non-citizens to vote in local elections. It comes as the district's primary election is set for June 4th. And joining us now is Mychael Schnell. Mychael is the congressional reporter with our media partners at The Hill. Mychael, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Let's talk about this bill and why Republican lawmakers are speaking out against it.
Yeah, so essentially what this piece of legislation did was it called for banning non-U.S. citizens for being able to vote in local Washington, D.C. elections. And back in 2022, the D.C. Council had approved a bill that would allow non-U.S. citizens to vote in local elections, essentially expanding the definition of an eligible voter. Now, there was a challenge to that by some D.C. voters that was ultimately tossed away, which would allow this that law to stand. So this week, we saw House Republicans once again take a stab at inner workings within Washington, D.C. and the nation's capital and pass a bill to try to ban those non-U.S. citizens from being able to vote in local elections. Now, I will note back in February, the House also passed a resolution disapproving of that D.C. Council law that was passed in 2022. That passed in the House, did not move at all in the Senate. Now the House has cleared this piece of legislation. It remains unclear if it'll have any legs in the Senate.
Why do Republicans keep going after D.C.?
I think that it could be for a number of reasons. A, that D.C. is a Democratic enclave, so they want to be able to try to meddle in their internal politics there. B, the fact that Congress does have the ability to have a say in local D.C. politics because it is, just because of the laws and how it works, you can pass disapproval resolutions to try to overturn Washington, D.C. law. We saw that last year when President Biden enacted a resolution that would undo D.C.'s revised criminal code. So we've seen this on a number of occasions. And the third reason, what may be why, which sort of relates to the first one, is D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser. She is a boogeyman for Republicans. She is somebody who has taken a lot of heat from Republicans. So Republicans, now we see them time and time again trying to go after policies in her area of jurisdiction.
Well, some Democrats did support it. Could you see why they were in favor of it?
Yeah, there were at the end of the day 52 Democrats who voted in support of this legislation. It's not really exactly clear what the reasoning there was. There were a number of moderates in that group, people like Henry Cuellar, people like Jared Golden, who ended up voting in favor of that legislation, but no real indication, at least at this point, what the motivation there was.
Mychael, what are the chances that the Senate will see this bill?
Yeah, see, that still is up in the air. And I'm sort of a little hesitant to ever predict how the Senate will deal or how anybody will deal with legislation that has to do with matters pertaining to Washington, D.C., because we'll remember it was last year, President Biden had said he was opposed to the legislation that would overturn D.C.'s revised criminal code. It ended up then passing the Senate. And at that point, right before it passed the Senate, President Biden said, well, actually, if this came on my desk, I would sign it. That infuriated a lot of House Democrats who had voted against it, thinking they had the cover of President Biden, that then encouraged other Senate Democrats to vote in favor of that legislation, which ultimately did make it into law. So at this current juncture, we do not have an indication of how the Senate will handle it.
Mychael, does the current political climate have an impact on where we are with this?
Yeah, absolutely. We're right now in the close lead up to the November elections, just months away. All the must-pass legislation that Congress had to deal with is essentially in the rearview mirror. They don't have to deal with anything on that must-pass agenda until the fall when government funding is back on tap. So what we're seeing right now and what we will continue to see in the weeks and months ahead is messaging legislation in both chambers. Republicans mainly in the House since they control the House, Democrats in the Senate since they have the upper hand in the Senate. Senate. So this is just one example of some messaging legislation, messaging bills that Republicans are teeing up in the House. It's in an effort to advance, different priorities of theirs. They've said that this is part of their election integrity push, and B, it gives them an opportunity to split Democrats. As I mentioned, there were a little more than 50 Democrats who voted in favor of this, a lot more who voted against it, but this is just an example of Republicans trying to break that Democratic unity.
Mychael Schnell, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks so much.